Good morning and welcome to the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations hearing on the views of the Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Uniform Heads of Services on the House Armed Services Committee report on professional military education. The title of our report was Another Crossroads, Professional Military Education 2 Decades After the Goldwater-Nichols Act and the Skeleton Panel. In April 2010, after more than a year of study and hearings and site visits by both members and staff to all the relevant institutions, the subcommittee published this report with 39 findings and recommendations. The report examined officer in residence PME as a critical investment in the most important element of our military, our people. We concluded that the United States cannot afford to be complacent when it comes to producing leaders capable of meeting significant challenges, whether at the tactical, operational, or strategic levels of warfare. Further, as a matter of national security, the country's continuing investment in the PME system must be wisely made. We also found that although today's PME system is basically sound, there are areas that need improvement. The committee's report of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2011 required that the department's most senior leaders provide their views on the subcommittee's PME report. DOD leadership provided their views in September and indicated they largely agreed with our findings and recommendations. We're here today to hear what they agreed with, what they disagreed with, and plans for moving forward, and also any thoughts about what our report and the ongoing discussions left out as our country moves forward on looking at professional military education. We have a fairly large group of witnesses today, and you know how the reality is if you all take an hour-long opening statement, I'm not going anywhere. I don't have an office anymore, so this is fine with me to sit here, but you all may have better things to do. We have your opening statements. They'll be made a part of the record. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of Representative Davis from California, who's the current chairperson, will be the ranking member in the new Congress on military personnel. And as you know, this subcommittee does not have legislative jurisdiction, but the military personnel subcommittee does. And she's had an ongoing interest and will be here in the new Congress. So we're joined today by, is it Learns? Yeah, Mr. Learns. Hebert, the Acting Director, Officer of Enlisted Personnel Management, Office of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. Brigadier General William Hicks, Director for Operational Plans and Joint Force Development, J7, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Brigadier General Sean McFarland, Deputy Commandant, Command and General Staff College, U.S. Army. Mr. Scott Lutterloh, Director, Total Force Training and Education Division, U.S. Navy. Mr. Dan Sitterly, Director of Force Development, Deputy Chief of Staff, Manpower and Personnel, U.S. Air Force. Major General Robert Neller, President of the Marine Corps University, U.S. Marine Corps. Thank you all for being here. Is this the order we're going to go down, Lori? We'll begin with you, and we'll put the clock on for 5 minutes. If you see the red light fire off, we're not going to set off flares or anything, but
it won't take that long.
Okay, good. So why don't you go ahead?
Yes, sir. Chairman Snyder, members of the committee, on behalf of the Secretary of Defense and Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness, I want to extend our appreciation for the committee's interest in improving professional military education. The department is in the process of analyzing the recommendations of the committee's report on this subject and reporting back to the Congress on the proposed changes to the department's policies and procedures. We take this task very seriously. We are using a senior level review panel to properly evaluate each recommendation. And while I will not presuppose their deliberations, the department's initial review indicates broad support for almost all of the recommendations, and with the exception of a few that we believe require a further study. That being said, the department's already taken action on some of the recommendations. For example, in fiscal year 2009, we asked the Director of the Joint Staff to review JPME 1 instructor positions to see if the positions could qualify for joint duty credit. This report has been reviewed by the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness and forwarded to the House and Armed Services Committee. In addition, the department proposed legislative change to remove the JPME 1 instructor prohibition specified in Title 10, which specifically addresses a recommendation in the report. This places these positions on equal footing with similar positions across the department. The department also agrees with the committee findings that the professional military education system is sound, but could use some improvements to become more flexible and attuned to emerging requirements. The Congress aided this effort immeasurably by passing legislation in 2007 National Defense Authorization Act, allowing the Department to move beyond the recognition of simple inter-service operations and to recognize interagency and international experiences. This single change, along with the flexibility provided to adopt career-long joint qualifications, is the type of proactive engagement described by the committee's report. Officers are now being recognized for significant joint experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan and other temporary operations not initially described in the charter Goldwater-Nichols legislation. By extension, these experiences are being institutionalized by more diverse student populations and broader curricula at professional military education institutions. The mere fact that these are now recognizable joint experiences in turn leads to an officer corps who will seek out attainment of these desirable education and experience opportunities in these areas. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of the Secretary and Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness on this topic, and look forward to your questions.
General Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss your...
Pull that microphone a little closer to you. Wouldn't mind.
Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the subcommittee's report. Joint professional military education is and will remain an essential pillar of joint officer development, a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff focus area. And we appreciate the subcommittee's continued emphasis on and support for joint professional military education across the entire education enterprise in the Department of Defense. We welcome the subcommittee's review, and we broadly concur with the report's conclusion that professional military education system is basically sound, and that there are systemic and institutional areas that require our continued attention. As you are aware, the Joint Staff continues, in conjunction with our service and DOD partners, a cross-department effort to analyze the report's recommendations. We expect this analysis to inform decisions this winter. While this effort continues, our preliminary conclusion gives broad endorsement to the report at the macro level. In conjunction with the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the services, the Joint Staff will continue to work through the report's recommendations in the coming months. That said, our expectation is that the results of this effort will ultimately drive changes in policy and procedure, including the Chairman's Officer Professional Military Education Policy, which guides joint professional military education across the services. We will persist in exploring all available avenues to improve and expand joint education to ensure our forces are equipped with the critical thinking skills and mental dexterity needed to succeed in all environments. One such initiative to expand access to opportunities for rigorous joint education is our proposal for authority to allow the Joint Forces Staff College to provide an alternative, non-resident Joint Professional Military Education Phase 2 program hosted by the combatant commands and the Joint Staff at off-site locations. That would be 10 locations in all. The proposal was carried in the Senate Armed Services Committee mark for the 2011 National Defense Authorization Act, and we welcome the subcommittee's support. As in all our endeavors, Congress's consistent support of joint professional military education has and will continue to enable us to maintain a vibrant and relevant education enterprise, and for that we are truly appreciative. I stand ready to address your questions. Thank you for this opportunity.
General McFarland.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, General Casey asked me to represent him here today because of my responsibilities, which include the leader development for all warrant officers and all officers between the rank of captain and lieutenant colonel. And it's my pleasure to be able to provide input on the Another Crossroads report today and update you on the continuing progress in the Army's professional military education programs. General Casey provided his personal insights in a letter on 6 October, and my job is to provide some additional details and also answer any questions that you might have. As General Casey noted, the Army appreciates the comprehensive review conducted by this committee, and we thank in particular Dr. Lori Fenner and her team for the quality of their work and the positive and professional manner in which they carried it out. We've learned a lot from that experience, and we've already begun to move forward on some of the findings and recommendations. The Army fully participated in the survey and concurs with the analysis, observations, and recommendations. It's important for me to note that the Army has just approved the Army Learning Concept 2015, which is a comprehensive approach to education and training throughout the Army, and it includes the schools that the report discusses. And I want to begin my remarks by providing a few of the most important examples of how the ALC 2015 supports the findings of another crossroads. One of your key findings noted that DOD should explore innovative avenues to develop their respective officer corps through education, training, assignments, or experience. The cornerstone of ALC 2015 is, in fact, supporting a balance of education, training, and experience over a career of professional growth and development. The document that will guide the Army through the process of change and innovation in its education and training is this ALC, and it applies to all cohorts within the Army: civilian, non-commissioned officers, warrant, and commission. But it's clearly in step with your recommendations. Also, we recognized that the finding that we needed a central focal point or a full-time director of military education, and the ALC 2015 does that. The position is called the Chief Learning Innovation Officer, or CLEO, and he'll be a key advisor to the Training and Doctrine Command's Commander General Dempsey on military education. Another crossroads also observed that TRADOC has been designated the manager for the human capital development for the Army, and although we're early in that process, we believe that ALC 2015 reinforces our commitment to continued improvement of PME in the Army. We don't consider leader development just to be those times spent in the schoolhouse, but it's something that happens throughout your career. Now we are trying harder to ensure that we get PME windows when it's needed and not just when officers are available. I do want to highlight one place where we disagree with the report, and that's probably because we didn't provide the necessary information to your team and may have led to some confusion. CGSC, Command General Staff College, does in fact have 70% civilian faculty, but they are not contractors, as the report stated. We only have a couple of contractors, and they mostly work in the digital Leader Development Center and not as primary instructors. Finally, I just want to thank the committee for its support on two issues critical to PME. First is extending JDAL credit to our non-host officers. That's critical, we believe, to providing high-quality JPME 1 credit to our students at intermediate level education. And secondly, we think that the committee did a great service by shining a light on the need for copyright ownership of scholarly works produced by our faculty. And your support of the Platt-Skelton Amendment will improve the ability of our faculty to get published, and that will, we believe, enhance recruiting for civilian faculty members to come to our schools. Finally, and I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to share the Army's views with you today, and we're already moving forward with many of the issues noted, and this report will guide PME in the future just as its predecessor, the Skelton Report, has for the past 20 years, and I stand ready to answer any questions. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, General. Mr. Ludlow.
Good morning, Chairman Snyder, Representative Davis, and distinguished members of the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss Navy's views on the committee's April 2010 report, Another Crossroads, Professional Military Education, 2 decades after the Goldwater-Nichols Act and the Skelton Panel. We appreciate the subcommittee's efforts in conducting such a comprehensive assessment of professional military education since enactment of Goldwater-Nichols. The major findings are accurate in identifying the fundamental issues warranting critical deliberation as we continue in our commitment to improve PME and the professional development of our officer corps. We concur with the subcommittee's assessment that the PME system is sound. As with any program, there are areas for potential improvement. Navy places significant value on PME as we develop and enable resilient and adaptable leaders to meet challenges at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of war. Navy continues to emphasize PME as we provide unique and complementary maritime warfighting skills to joint and combined force commanders. In response to the need for increased joint service-specific subject matter to be taught earlier in an officer's career, Navy established a career continuum of PME. We have a sequenced continuum of learning that provides relevant education aligned to career progression spanning E1 through 08, with a goal of providing Navy's total force with a standardized, comprehensive understanding of the Navy and its warfighting capabilities. We are currently evaluating the report's recommendation that Navy consider instituting a quality board process for selection of in-residence PME students by evaluating our screening process of top-performing officers for eligibility to attend service colleges. Under the leadership of the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, the Navy has appointed a cross-functional working group to evaluate the current selection processes for JPME in-residence education. We concur with the report's observation that while PME is a factor in cultivating strategists, it is not the primary means for developing future strategic decision makers. As noted in the report, Navy has a relatively advanced process for cultivating strategists. We acknowledge there is more to be done with respect to developing strategic decision makers and are actively engaged in a review of how we develop our senior leaders. Competing demand for time in the career track of officers of the unrestricted line remains a primary challenge. Recently, we implemented new approaches to officer development through introduction of specialty career paths for unrestricted line officers. These specialty career paths allow Navy to better integrate training, education, and experiential tours focused on specialty areas while officers continue to serve in their warfare communities. Navy takes a balanced approach to professional education that views operational competency and the primacy of command as key professional measures for naval officers. Professional military education has been instrumental in developing a highly educated and more effective leader. We value the flexibility provided by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which permits Navy to manage the content, quality, and conduct of our PME continuum. On behalf of the Chief of Naval Operations and the entire Navy, thank you again for your exceptionally strong support of our military members and their family, and for your career-long leadership in the professional development of our Navy total force.
Thank you. Mr. Sitterly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to discuss Air Force Chief of Staff Schwartz's views on the Crossroads Report. This is the fourth time in this Congress I've had the opportunity to testify in airman development. Each time you help us to fine-tune the development of our most important weapons system, our total force airmen. Thank you. We continue to develop talented and diverse airmen at the tactical, operational, and strategic level. We concur with the report's general tenet that the professional military education system is still basically sound, but with systematic and institutional areas that require a heightened focus and effort to improve. We endorse the idea that education has to be relevant to the student and the service, as well as inseparable from the execution of our developmental doctrine and support of service and joint organizational requirements. The relevancy of education is one of the main premises that drive our desire and our ability to incorporate joint and service-specific subject matter into our curriculum and deliver that content to officers earlier in their careers, all in an effort to anticipate and adapt to current and future challenges. Central to the report's concern and our focus is the necessity to develop strategists. Combined with a strong fellowship program, we recently added advanced academic degree opportunities in history, political science, international relations, economics, and philosophy to our portfolio. These new educational experiences are being earned at some of the nation's most prestigious universities. Through an increased focus on critical thinking at junior levels, we are developing an officer corps that is capable of and empowered to solve the problems they will encounter throughout their careers. I should also mention the importance we place on continuum of service in our country's entire national security arena. While we are all familiar with how strategic thinking airmen like Nordy Schwartz and Duncan McNabb transform Transcom's development and distribution operations, deployment and distribution operations to the warfighter, for instance. Let's not forget those airmen cultivated to think strategically who still serve in our country's defense out of uniform. Dr. Lori Fenner of this committee received her PhD in history and is now one of the foremost authorities on military human capital in our country. Colonel retired Will Gunn leads the Veterans Administration's General Counsel Office. Colonel Hal Hoxie is making strategic decisions in matters incredibly important to our country and to the future of America as the president of Central Christian College. Airman Les Lyles is a defense industry strategic thinker, as well as chairman of the Congressional Military Leadership Diversity Commission. Mark Clanton, Chuck Bush, Jim Finch, Chuck Greenwood, Lane Tingle, Charles Garcia are all involved in strategic thinking in the national security business every day using the education and experience developed in our Air Force. Our primary PME mission is on the application of military power, but our development programs directly contribute to the diplomatic, international, and economic instruments both in and out of uniform. Beyond content and delivery, we also concur with the report's finding that we have a need to address faculty and resource concerns at our institutions. Therefore, we're in the process of reviewing policies regarding our hiring practices, job advancement, and academic freedom, as well as copyright and intellectual property concerns. The Air Force has made significant advances in the past 2 years in our approach to developmental education. We've upped our game with a new online Air Command and Staff College program, the complete transformation of company-grade officer professional military education, new advanced courses within Air Command and Staff College and Air War College, and expanded enrollment in progress toward a doctoral program in the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. These efforts, combined with conducive military personnel and developmental opportunities, will allow us to continue forging the synergistic relationship between Air Force training, experience, and education. As evidenced by the Crossroads report, your insight and continued support ensures our ability to fly, fight, and win in air, space, and cyberspace. Thank you. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sidley. Joe Naylor.
Chairman Snyder, Representative Davis, good morning. Thank you for permitting me to discuss and represent the Marine Corps' views on the report and other Crossroads. The Marine Corps deeply appreciates the extensive research, analysis, and documentation contained in the report. The work of the subcommittee provided a thorough assessment of the status of PME and, more importantly, provided sound recommendations on a variety of issues that will improve our educational programs. We have carefully reviewed the report and are already at work implementing many of the recommendations. Additionally, we continue to work closely with the Joint Staff and the other services to ensure a coordinated approach as we examine each issue. The Marine Corps and Marine Corps University in particular is constantly reviewing and revising our PME programs to ensure we meet the needs of the operating forces and prepare our leaders. We've strengthened the faculty and the staff of our schools and colleges and continually review our curriculum for relevance. We plan infrastructure improvements and technology enhancements that we believe will dramatically improve the learning environment for our students. And while we'll make our quality resident officer programs even better, our current emphasis, as you know from your visit down to Quantico, is the improvement of our enlisted PME programs. As noted in the Issues for Further Study section of the report, progress has been made here, but much work remains to be done to fully prepare our enlisted leaders. Last month, General Amos published his Commandant's Planning Guidance identifying professional military education as one of his top priorities. In fact, today at 13:30, he's holding an in-progress review, which I'll participate in to discuss where we are with education. Excuse me. His guidance directs that plans be developed to increase the number of Marines attending resident, officer, and enlisted education programs and to continue to further develop Marine Corps University into a world-class institution. We're in the process of developing options to increase attendance in our programs without sacrificing quality or desired learning outcomes. We believe we've made substantial progress in strengthening our faculty, students, and curricula. We're also on course to make significant progress in our facilities. For example, we have over $120 million in MilCon programmed over the next 3 years for our educational facilities. I'm also pleased to report that the Expeditionary Warfare School Distributed Education Network, or EDEN, an item of interest during a subcommittee visit, is now fully funded and will be operational as soon as we can procure the equipment and implement the concept. The Commandant's Planning Guidance and the subcommittee report complement each other and provide a good roadmap to improve our already strong PME programs. Again, we appreciate the support of Congress and specifically this subcommittee for military PME. I stand ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. Ms. Davis, would you like to begin? We'll go back and forth on the 5-minute clock here. One of the reasons we did this report is it had been some time since the Armed Services Committee had really looked at PME. There's been a lot going on for the last decade, but I think it was also one of those topics that didn't get the attention it probably deserved even before the events of the last decade. My question is, as you look forward, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, whatever down the line, what mechanisms do you see that are in place to assess how well the PME system is doing, the in-residence officer PME system, and does it need to be changed, revisited? What's your assessment tools about how well the system is working? And General Nell, let's just begin with you and go backwards this time.
We're always in a process of assessing, at least internally, how we're doing. Obviously, the committee report provides an external assessment. Every class that graduates from command and staff or McWar or even Expeditionary Warfare School for our captains, we go out to the operating force who receive these officers and ask them if they've met the requirement. I mean, are they satisfied with what they're receiving? Again, I take the response, people's time is valuable and short, but we get an almost 100% positive response on the quality of the education that these officers receive. We also ask the officers if we believe that we've prepared them for their service. And again, their answers, in my opinion, are a little bit more candid. But again, the overwhelming majority, 90+% in almost all categories, felt that the experience and the educational experience that they gained while they were at Marine Corps University helped them better perform their duties, whether it's in a staff or a command position. We also look at our own objectives. We use the task that came out of the Wilhelm study in 2006 to self-assess ourselves as to whether or not we're making progress. As your report noted, we do have some facilities and infrastructure issues, which in the last year, because of decisions by the Commandant to fund facilities which are going to house the infrastructure, I really see the new buildings as technology that's just in a building. I think we're going to make progress there. So those are what we have internally to self-assess.
Thank you for the question. I agree. As primarily a force provider, it's important that we go to our commanders, our combatant commanders, especially in the field, to ask if we're providing them officers that have both the experience and the education necessary to execute our military requirements in a joint environment. For instance, we found that we had a gap in our more junior officers and their ability to operate as we're deploying folks in this environment, more junior than perhaps we had in the past. And so we've totally revamped now our basic developmental education at the Squadrons Officers School and Air and Space Basic course to adapt the curricula to that. Additionally, we found from combatant commanders that they valued those students that we put through our School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. And so we have increased that program so that we're selecting more people to put into that program with that curriculum in addition to that feedback that we get from the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the case of the Naval War College, in addition to the internal assessments, I would say that there are some other training objectives that are completed by the War College. For example, Maritime Component Commander training, joint staff training for our operational commands, that actually put the President of the War College in training and education situations with COCOMs in theater 2 to 3 times a year. So he's getting direct feedback from those leaders on the quality of the education. In addition to that, the significant wargaming capability at War College has always led to the identification of areas where the Navy needs to move in terms of maritime dominance, and specifically where the War College needs to move with their curricula. And finally, I would point out that the Military Education Coordination Council Our robust participation in that is what leads to driving change into the curricula across the board and standardizing it across the services and throughout the joint community. Thank you.
Well, right now we are in an era of persistent conflict, and probably the ultimate indicator of how well we're doing in PME will be how well we're doing on the battlefield. And we believe that PME is the key to agile thinkers, and we are constantly reevaluating and assessing how we go about creating creative and adaptive leaders. The assessments mentioned by General Neller and others are part of our assessment process, both asking the students and asking their commanders out there. Another way we can assess the value of PME is based on the demand for PME. The officers seeking admission to PME, the competition for going to school, and also the demand from in the field for PME graduates. Right now, we are frequently asked to hurry up and graduate more SAMs, School of Advanced Military Studies officers. There's a high demand for those trained planners out there in the force. Obviously, people attach a great deal of importance on the value of that professional military educational experience. So we're doing something right there. And we're hoping to expand that to across all of PME. Lately, there's been a devaluation in the minds of many of our officers that of the value of education. They value experience. Getting more hash marks on the sleeve is perceived as more important than going and sitting in a school. We're trying to redress that balance with the Army Learning Concept 2015. And when more officers vote with their feet and try to go to school instead of get a third or a fourth tour downrange, we'll know that we're obviously providing value to the force, and when the members of the force see that.
Mr. Chairman, I endorse the comments of my colleagues here, and I'll offer a slightly different perspective given my responsibilities for oversight on behalf of the chairman. Since 2000, my staff and members of the various schools, universities, and colleges run by the military have conducted 44 page visits, and these are process of accreditation of joint education visits, not unlike the accreditation that the universities and colleges go through to offer civilian master's degrees, but focused on joint professional military education and their adherence to the OPMEP, looking at best practices in terms of how they deliver joint education and that sort of thing. As part of that review, we also dig into their own assessment programs, and each of them has a very comprehensive program, as they've laid out, focused on not only the perspective of the student, but also of the customer, which is, of course, the commanders, be they service commanders or joint operational commanders. And that those assessments are very clearly indicate a demand for additional education, more of what these universities and colleges deliver, as well as a reflection from many of the students that they were glad that they had gotten some of that education before they actually went into an assignment. I can tell you anecdotally, the staff officers that work for me and those that I've worked with in the past in assignments at large headquarters and also in the Pentagon all note the fact that they were leveraging the education they received at a war college, be it from the National Defense University, ICAF, National War College, or one of the service schools. Lastly, to build off of comments of General McFarland, the demand from the field is also very clear. We've seen this from the combatant commands that they are looking for more joint education and actually having it sooner. The throughput at the universities and at the Joint Forces Staff College for Joint Professional Military Education Level 2 is challenged to meet the demands of the joint authorizations out in the combatant commands and now with forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so we've looked at how to meet that demand more broadly, and I think that's your best indicator of whether the product that's being put out by those who educate our officers is useful, is the fact that they're demanding more of the same.
Sir, as my colleagues have described to you, we have a system of measures, if you will, to ensure that we're meeting the demands in the future, whether it be the internal school practices, assessments, the Military Education Coordination Council, which we, OSD participates in, as well as the page visits, which we participate in. We see this whole system of measures, if you will, or indicators taken together, whether or not change is required. For our part, OSD is taking the recommendations of the committee's report seriously in that we are reconsidering our role in this entire enterprise to determine how we can best create synergy between the service efforts and the joint staff efforts and lend to creating an opportunity that in the future we can anticipate the needs of the students far in advance of when they might be required.
Mrs. Davis.
Thank you all for your responses. I was interested, I think General Hicks first mentioned the, you know, the fact that we're fighting two wars. And I know that in the meetings that we had, there was some discussion about the fact that it was difficult for people to take time off for seat time, a very, you know, big problem that all the services were experiencing. And so I just wonder if you could, you know, respond to that a little bit more in terms of, I think you've talked about the broadening of experiences in many ways. There probably couldn't be a better teacher than applying the knowledge and the strategic thinking that's really required. But I wonder at the same time how difficult a problem you think that is, and if there is anything else that we should be supporting or helping with to be sure that there is certainly a high incentive for people to find a way to have that time. And again, we're talking not just about thinking about fighting the wars that we're fighting today, but the future wars and how we get that from those who are in the services today, and certainly our officers. Anybody want to? You've sort of taught. You obviously have plans to think about that, but I wonder if you could just focus on that and the extent to which that you think that is truly a problem and what we're actually doing to send that message.
Ma'am, I'll take the first shot, being as you mentioned me by name. I would tell you that as part of the PAGE process, we look at not only the delivery of in-resident education, but also the delivery of non-resident or distributed learning education. And as you know, currently JPME 2 is delivered only in resident. And I think that at the time that those strictures were codified, it made sense because the art of distributed learning is not what it is today. And I have to say, from my own perspective, having visited several of the colleges in my time as a J7, there are some pretty innovative approaches and some very interactive means of instruction that certainly did not exist, you know, years ago, several years ago. And you actually, in one case, I observed a class being conducted where students were in a chat room, literally globally, dealing with a problem, and frankly, in some cases, actually dealing with the problem more as if they would be, as if they were actually doing it for real, because they weren't all in the same classroom where they could talk and make coordination easy. So in terms of learning how to, you know, deal with a very critical problem, a complex problem, deliver rapid critical thinking, that sort of thing, we've come a long way. And frankly, that's really the basis, and I'll harp on this more time, the basis of our legislative proposal to allow us to start with looking at the art of the possible, and in this case, the delivery of JPME-2 in a very controlled environment, 10 sites across the combatant commands, where you have an automatic joint pool of officers, and that provides, one of the key points of joint experience is interaction with other services, and is done at the combatant commands where they are demanding more officers have the joint education opportunity. And from that, we can then learn more about how we deliver JPME-2 in a distributed environment, and see if we can then transfer that to our combatant command, or I'm sorry, our service colleagues who currently are only able to deliver JPME-1 credit from a distributed learning perspective. Thank you.
I think, Representative Davis, your question, correct me if I'm wrong, deals with the kind of inevitable tension between deploying and getting to the fight and going to school. Again, this is my opinion. I think at the beginning, and I think John McFarland talked about this, there was a tremendous drive that, you had to get to the fight because for all the good reasons, you wanted to participate and test yourself and be involved. But as this has gone on longer, I think most people have been, and so now they take a longer view. And so I think there's been a shift, and that people understanding that, all right, I've been, I'm competitive, I'm still going to be considered qualified for promotion, I need to get my education, and I get the other benefit of a year where my family and I get some stability. And I can't prove that, but that's my personal view, that I think that's part of the reason that the force has been as sustainable as it has, is because officers have been able to take time off to go to school and not take a break, but get educated, but at the same time have some sort of normalcy in their personal and their family life. So I think, at least for the foreseeable future, I think there will be more and more people who will see school not as an inconvenience, but as both a benefit for them personally and for them professionally. But that tension is always going to be there. And then again, it's going to depend on where that individual officer, where he or she is in their career. Are they coming from the operating forces and going to school so that they feel confident that they have good, solid operational background? Or are they coming from the supporting establishment and there's this desire to get back to the fight? It's their turn to go again. And professional military education will assist them in either way. So we're seeing a slight shift, at least in talking in, I can't document this, but it's just my assessment is that more and more people are seeing the benefit and advantage of going to resident PME.
Ma'am, Chairman Miller is exactly right, as always, but I just wanted to add on a little. The Army has recognized that perhaps some of our officers need additional incentive to get into the schoolhouse because without that mentoring or coaching to enter resident education, they just simply will stay away and continue to rack up additional experience. So we're trying to put teeth back into our professional military education policies, where promotion and selection for command will be not available to officers who do not have the requisite schooling. So we've kind of drifted away from that under the duress of the demands of the operational force. We're coming back to that. One of the big challenges we had is the Army is unique in that we've gone to universal intermediate level educations. All majors are required to attend some form of school, either distributed learning, like General Hicks mentioned, or resident, or a blended version of that with partial resident, partial distributed. And we have looked at our capacity for that and have expanded that to meet the demand. Now we just need to get the officers into the programs, and that's what the policies will do. Finally, we have looked at our younger officers, the captains, and we're looking at a pilot program for a captain's career course that doesn't require as much in-resident time, and the resident time will be determined partially by a learning assessment prior to attending school, so it's more of a modular, tailored to the officer rather than industrial age. Well, this is what year group you're in, so you will attend this schooling. It's more learner-centric, officer-centric, and that's all part of the Army Learning Concept 2015. Thank you.
Representative Davis, I'd just like to comment on 3 things quickly. I agree wholeheartedly with General Hicks. Distributed JPME2 will go a long way to providing additional opportunities for our officers to get the joint qualification, the joint education that they need in their careers to adequately man those joint combatant commands. So anything that we can do to facilitate that is very useful. I understand very well that there's a trade-off between 10 to 12 months in residence and the ability to spend valuable time in seminars talking and thinking with compatriots of other services and even the international and interagency community. But there is also tremendous value in a 10-week, very focused time frame in which those officers are gaining some of the very same concepts in joint warfighting that are the items that are needed in theater. Secondly, I'll be leaving next week to travel to Newport to the War College to invest an entire day in investigating the art of the possible relative to distributed learning. Not so much to supplant JPME1 or JPME2, but to look at innovative ways by which we can educate our officers over a prolonged period of time, perhaps through interactive distributed seminars, perhaps through war games over a weekend, perhaps tailored to certain career points, career milestones. I'll be investigating those aspects with the War College to see where we can go, maybe on a different vector than we've considered so far. The third and last thing is an aggressive policy pursuit. So I also agree with General McFarland here. We have rather aggressively addressed some of these issues through policy. We combined our surface combatant executive officer and commanding officer tours into one to shorten that period of time aboard the ship and provide additional opportunity in the career pipeline for advanced education. We've also insisted policy-wise on completion of JPME1 prior to assuming command at the commander command. We've thought about it at Major Command, perhaps for JPME2 completion. We continue to aggressively pursue policy issues there. And in conjunction with our selection process, the review that was recommended by the panel, I believe the combination of these 3 things will put us in pretty good position for the future. Thank you.
If I could just add from the Air Force perspective, we face some of the same challenges, and the complexity of the current operations does require us, I think, to look at both the students but also the faculty. And we value both the depth and the breadth of experience, and so at the faculty, we want to ensure that we give our instructors the opportunity not only to establish their academic credentials, but also to bring in to the classroom a current operations perspective. So there's a very short period of time in a career to get a lot of things done, from command to staff to deployments, faculty, and so on and so forth. And so, as we noted in our report, as General Schwartz noted, we would like to continue our dialogue with our colleagues on the faculty to student ratio in the OpMep. So, thank you.
Representative Davis, to capitalize on the comments of my colleagues, I would offer that there is no one ideal method of delivering professional military education. It differs by officer. It differs in many cases by virtue of where they are in their individual careers. By having a broad spectrum of opportunities to deliver joint professional military education or professional military education in the services case, we create the diversity of the force of thinking that you wouldn't normally have if you had a single institution. just as you wouldn't normally send all of your engineers to one institution because they would all come away with a very similar thought pattern in many cases, you wouldn't, we believe professional military education is similarly suited. Having distributed courses at various combatant commands attunes those officers who attain school and with that combatant command of certain knowledge that others may not have if they went to National War College or elsewhere. So I would just leave you with that thought.
Maybe I'll just direct this question at the two of you there, and if anyone disagrees, but some of the issues we've been talking about for both students and faculty is about where does the education fit into their career. And early on when we were talking with students and even faculty, we would hear reports that, or from the combatant commanders, that some students were going to a school long past the time that they should have, so it just didn't speak much to them because they already learned that, or they're being sent to a billet where they should have had the school, and 2 or 3 months into that billet, that combatant commander is having to send that person to a school which he wished he had had before they got there. And we heard the same thing with faculty, by the way. If somebody assigned to be a faculty member, they really wanted to be a wing commander or something. But how much are those kinds of things that you deal with out of your control because they're really a product of the personnel system and moving people around? How much control do you all have and influence do you have over having a personnel system come up so that it really can, in a very sophisticated manner, look at both where they're at in their career, where they're going to go, where that particular 10-month break, for example, fits in an appropriate way both for the student and the military?
If I may lead off. In 2007, when Congress enacted legislation which removed the sequencing requirement, it created the flexibility for the department to make sure that we could better time that professional military education in that officer's career, whether it be exactly adjacent to that joint staff tour, or perhaps is just prior to sending him off to the desert for a deployment. What it allowed for was a much greater flexibility, not less flexibility, as we moved forward. Now, we've only had a couple of years under this enhanced Goldwater-Nichols legislation. But what we are seeing is that the services do have greater flexibility in timing it to both attune it to the officer's future potential to serve in additional grades beyond that, but to also consider whether that officer is going to be well-timed for a combatant command tour, a joint staff tour, a future deployment. But the underlying problem is what General Hicks identified earlier. Demand far outstrips our ability to provide or develop officers, particularly at the JPME 2 level. We believe we've solved that at the JPME 1 level, but not at the JPME 2 level.
Sir, I'll only comment briefly on this as my personal responsibilities are focused on the education aspect, and the manpower management is not within my purview.
But it has great influence over what happens.
It does indeed, sir, and I will touch on one issue, particularly regarding faculty. In general, especially with the joint officers, education in general flows appropriately in the macro sense. You go to staff college, you get a branch qualifying job, if you will, within your service, whether it's a department head tour or as a staff officer in a brigade or a division. And then you get a joint assignment, let's say as an action officer. You have JPME 1, you have staff experience, you have combat experience now, obviously, in many cases. Where those 04s may step up or get promoted while they're in a joint assignment, The combatant command does have the option, the opportunity to send their officers, effectively out of cycle to the resident JPME 2 program down at Joint Forces Staff College to kind of add or hone their skills at the operational level. That throughput is admittedly inadequate. And again, that is one of the reasons why we've proposed this expansion of non-resident delivery of that program, so that more officers at the combatant command level, where the majority of this demand comes from for JPME 2 qualified officers, provides that flexibility so that the combatant commander doesn't have to give up 10 weeks of an officer's time on his staff, but can work this in parallel, if you will, with their day jobs, and do so in a way that is consistent. And in fact, I've looked at some of the ways the services deliver this capability. They'll actually, you can, regardless of where you are in the world, if you walk into some of the distributed learning seminars that they have, you may be assigned to Norfolk, and if you are in Hawaii and you're attending the distributed learning course, you actually walk into almost, the course is identical in terms of how it's delivered. And so that's the kind of approach that we're looking at, so that as officers move, as they are, if you're in CENTCOM and you're coordinating with UCOM and you happen to be in Germany and not down in Tampa, you can still pick up that course on that day and stick with your training, your education opportunities. As far as the officers piece and their participation as faculty, as Mr. Herbert noted, the opportunity for JDAL positions for non-host faculty is a great step forward. However, their team partners who are from the host faculty are teaching joint matters as well, and frankly, it's been my observation that there's a great synthesis that's gained in actually teaching these joint operational approaches. And I think expanding that opportunity so that those officers who are teaching joint matters, even though they are at the Army War College or at Command and General Staff College would be an opportunity that would expand participation across the board, and frankly, I think meet some of the concerns of the officers that you interviewed.
Any of you have any comment on that topic? I think it was you, General McFarland, that, oh, by the way, I think that my guess is that will be a bridge too far, at least at this time, for an Army officer, an Army institution teaching joint matters. I think it'll probably be considered a bridge too far, but I might get in my licks here on the defense bill. I think there are a couple items on the Senate side that they have not yet done their defense bill, and I still have some optimism we'll get a defense bill out of this Congress in the next couple, 3 weeks. But this is complicated stuff, and the sooner you can get up to here, particularly with a new Congress coming in and new leadership, the more likely your all's recommendations will be included as part of the defense bill next year. Although you did, I think, a couple items that we've been supportive of this side did get into the Senate side, and so if we get a defense bill, we'll work to preserve those if we can.
Appreciate your support on that.
Several issues I wanted to ask about. General McFarland, I think it was you that brought up the issue of copyright. We had talked about that. In fact, I think maybe it was last year, I had some thought that we ought to be able to do something in the House side on the defense bill. It turns out it's a pretty complicated issue. I know Mr. Platts and Mr. Skelton had tried it some years ago, I think, unsuccessfully. And so if this issue is important, and I think it is, and it would seem to me that it's solvable, we may need to get a little joint discussion group going on with some smart lawyers from the military side and some smart lawyers from here, but also some smart lawyers perhaps from Judiciary Committee and some others to sit down and figure out, okay, where are the concerns that you all have and the concerns on those who think this isn't perhaps the way to go, and try to sort that out, because we tried to come up with some language and met resistance along the way. So it's easy for us to recognize a problem. I'm not sure it's going to be as easy as I think or originally thought to solve it, but that may be something that you'll want to work on. I think it was also you, General McFarland, I think, talked in the most detail about the getting students from the civilian side. You mentioned the interagency kind of swaps. Was that your statement? I think it was.
It's in my written
Written
statement.
statement, yeah. I'd like all of you to comment on that if you would. Our experience was that when we visited some of the seminar groups at the different institutions, our military personnel, would have paid money or had a payroll deduction if they could have had some additional State Department Foreign Service officers in their seminar groups with them. How are we doing, as you're looking ahead, how are we doing, do you think, at getting the numbers of civilian government personnel from the other agencies of government to be in these courses? Start with you, General Nell.
I think our situation is very good, and I think it's directly related to our geography. The fact that we're just south of Washington, it's much easier for the federal government agencies to send someone to be a student down at Quantico than it is for them to send them to Kansas or to Alabama or even to Rhode Island. So we're doing very well. I mean, we 4 of 27 at McWar, almost 1 per seminar at command and staff. So we're very content. We're happy with the quality of person that we get. So I think we're blessed by, hopefully by reputation, but probably more so by geography.
We're doing better as well, and the quality seems to be getting better as well as we continue to go through this, and those students go back and talk about their experiences with their particular agency. The other thing we're doing is trying to approach it from the other end, and that is we're exploring fellowships where we can actually take our military officers into their programs. We recently did one at the senior level with the State Department, so we're approaching it from both ends, but we certainly appreciate what those interagency folks bring to the fight.
I think the Army's been the most aggressive about doing swaps, correct?
Yes, sir. We have 28 interagency fellows right now at the major level, ILE, and I think the number's about 70 at the War College fellowship level. But the War College fellows are more in academia, think tanks, places like that. Our interagency fellows are plugged right into Homeland Security or U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I just had a meeting with FEMA last week, and they're looking at sending 2 of their officers in exchange for 2 of ours going to work in FEMA for a year. And of course, State Department SCRS is a big partner of ours, sir.
Mr. Ludlow.
Yes, sir. We've just recently begun expanding our fellowships into interagencies. Most recently, discussions about State Department. So it looks like we'll be sending a couple fellowships to the State Department this year. Our faculty at the War College has been in the process of transitioning. Our provost and dean of faculty, Ambassador Peters, comes with a very strong background in interagency support, as well as some of the other members of the faculty that she's drawing into the fold. We're trying to increase our student representation from some of the other agencies to get that vital discussion going. I think we're making progress there. The last point I'll leave you with is we've also been focusing over the years on international cooperation. So that international piece of it is also important to us.
Yeah, it is. I think I'll address this question to the 2 of you again as the overseers. One of the detail issue that we talked about through the last year was it's been difficult to look at the services and to come up with an apples-to-apples comparison of cost per student, which I think would be helpful to everyone. Maybe it's impossible. I mean, General Neller mentioned geography. Maybe it's a lot cheaper getting somebody to come to Quantico than it is to Kansas. I don't know. It seems like it shouldn't be that difficult. Where are we at with that issue of having the different institutions or the different services come up with a cost per student of doing the kinds of in-residence PME? Or are we nowhere?
Sir, we're further than nowhere, but we're not where we should be. And so it's one of those issues that continues to plague us. The trade-off, as you probably well understand, is having the service having a measure that's meaningful for them
No, that's right.
vices a measurement that's not meaningful for them, but is universally applied to all at the same time. And so we're working with the services to work through this issue.
It seems like, I mean, it's, at some point you'll come up with a number, and I guess it's ended up here, but it's not something that is necessarily helpful to us. It seems like it would be helpful to you on the institutions if you can see, one service has got dramatically more efficient, that would be helpful, and they've tried to figure out how people save money. It's consistent with what Secretary Gates is trying to do as far as saving money also, I think would be,
Yes, sir.
over the long haul, you all going to try to make the case that you're efficient and deserve the money. Does anybody else have any comment on that, or, yeah?
Yes, sir, I do. But before I answer that, if I could just very briefly on the civilian participation thing.
Yeah.
Right now, we have about, depending on the year, 5 to 10% of the student body across the board is from our other agencies, and we expect about 290 next year. Some of the challenges have been raised to us. We do sensing sessions as part of this page process. The feedback we get from the civilian representatives from these other agencies is, one, their agencies are taking a hit by sending them to school because they don't have a float. As you know, the uniformed services have the ability to transfer an officer into the TTHS account, and it doesn't therefore take an officer out of a staff or out of a brigade or out of a battalion to send them to school. There's a replacement available. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, in general, the other agencies appear to manage the billet, not the man. And so when the person, male or female, goes off to school, they may or may not have a job when they come back, and that's a challenge for them personally. And then some other feedback we've received is there is concern about some of the regulations on housing, and I know this is particularly true with civilian faculty members from other agencies or faculty members who could, if they were in the military, live on base, but find that it's a challenge for them because of regulatory and other issues. And the last piece, again, anecdotally, is that frankly some of your fellow committees are less interested in this integration than others, and that translates into whether there's support on the Hill for those agencies to be aggressive in putting their personnel into our military schools at the degree that we certainly would like to see them.
That may be something that, as time goes along, it might be helpful to, in some informal way, figure out who we need to go talk to, because I think, I mean, it's clear to me when you talk to the students, both military and
Yes, sir.
the civilian side, they both benefit greatly from it. Particularly when you do these swaps too, that's very helpful to both sides.
Absolutely, sir. Sir, just very briefly on the issue of cost comparisons. We are collecting the cost factors from the services right now. They are varied, as you can imagine, and there are a lot of drivers which at this point, because we haven't actually gotten all the data in, I can't give you a firm assessment of why the costs vary per student, but I'm sure these issues of geography, physical plant, I mean, there's a number of issues, transportation of those officers to and from the schools, and that sort of thing. So we'll continue to work that issue because it's of interest to all of us.
I think back to, General, when your comment about you getting some pushback from, I guess, the congressional side on sharing, having civilians participate. I remember on a report that we did on PRTs a couple of years ago, just as coincidentally of somebody from my district who's a veterinarian with the Department of Agriculture who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. At some point, she sent us an email that we included in our report, which said, she just volunteered. She said, I sometimes feel like there are more barriers between the different agencies of our government than there are between us and the Iraqis. Which was pretty, I mean, she really meant it, that she could go out and talk to a group of farmers or government ag people that are Iraqi and felt like she made more progress than sometimes trying to talk to other agencies of government. So I think that's the motivation. We're trying to break down those barriers, and maybe it starts here in Congress. Maybe I'll direct it here, and then any comments you all have. Again, as we're talking about these slots and the availability of PME, if we had a group of National Guard and Marine Corps Reserve, Army Reserve, Navy Reserve Air Force Reserve people, would they all feel like there was adequate slots for their personnel, not adequate opportunities for Guard and Reserve personnel?
I think it would depend largely on which level of education we're talking about. When we,
So at which level do you think?
well, the
we haven't done as good a job with?
JPME 2 throughput is admittedly short of demand, both for the active component as well as for the reserve components.
Disproportionately for the reserve component?
Okay, 2% of officers each year and 1.5% for the reserve component. But I think largely the feedback I've gotten from the reserve component service members dealt with the AJPME, their equivalent JPME 2 course. And it wasn't so much about the course per se, it was the many demands the reservists face. They have to balance the demands of a full-time position, civilian position, the demands of their reserve component, the demands of a family, the demands in many cases of pursuing advanced education, and the demands of pursuing, in some cases at the same time, professional military education. And so it's trying to find ways that we can better facilitate that within those competing demands so it's not so onerous on them. So it doesn't come at a time when all of these issues are brought to bear at the exact same time. So from the reserve component feedback that I've received, that's the largest issue. I've also received some feedback on the capstone course and not having enough throughput there in order to accommodate all the demand they have. So it's the top 2 levels of PME for them.
Yeah, I would just echo that point that their real focus is on JPME 2. AJPME provides them an equivalent accreditation. I think that there is a concern that it's not seen as equal to the actual JPME 2 course. I believe that if we are able to expand JPME 2 into into this distributed option, that'll be the first step in providing a more flexible access for our reserve component into that curriculum on a larger basis. There has, however, been a reasonably significant increase in a number of reserve component, both Reserve Title 10 and Title 32 National Guard officers in both resident JPME 2 as well as in capstone. So there is a concerted effort to do that. But there is a balance because there's a requirement, particularly to look at the number of joint billets that are populated by reservists above the state level. I know that the National Guard has implemented joint headquarters at the state level, but above the state level, those National Guard officers who, like General Sherlock, who are actually, I guess he's a reservist, who's the Chief of Staff at AFRICOM. I mean, those kinds of reserve officers clearly need to have access to that level of education. But right now, the throughput is a challenge, as your study outlines, across the board.
Any of you have any comments on that issue? Yes, General.
I think in the aggregate that there are issues with Reserve Guard PME. In fact, I've got a meeting next week with General Darrell Moore, who's a reserve general who works reserve affairs for our manpower, and to talk about this. I think, as mentioned, JPME 2 is probably the toughest one, but I think it goes further down. Because just as on the officer side, you have to have JPME 2 to be considered for flag rank. On the enlisted side, if you're a gunnery sergeant, you have to have the advanced course. And we recently ran a reserve advanced enlisted PME course, and we had slots for 100, and 105 Marines showed up. And we put them all through because we knew that if they got there that we were going to give them the opportunity to go to the course. So I think, I don't know what the answers are. We have slots at command and staff and the other schools for reserves, and they're filled. We have a very aggressive non-res program through the College of Distance Education and Training, where I think most of them get their PME for the officer side. But just as the joint staff and OSD is looking at a regional approach to JPME2 in line with what the Commandant's asked us to do. One of our COAs is probably going to consider a regional campus, more of a hybrid, blended type seminar. We have a resident and a non-resident portion, which I think most people would feel is potentially superior to a fully non-res online. And I think we'll see a lot of our reserves, hopefully, because if they're in the local area, at lower cost, be able to take advantage of that too. So it is an issue. JPME2 is probably the biggest, but I think it filters all the way through the force.
Any other comments?
Yes, sir, Chairman Snyder. I would just add that we've increased our reserve throughput through Navy War College over the past 2 years, marginally so, but increasing nonetheless. And the reserve force is actively interested in additional quotas through the War College, so we'll actively pursue that moving forward. I would also point out that in the war, we've got about 2,900 officers in the war right now, and nearly half of those are reserve officers. So this education is very well needed in that part of the force. How we resource it moving forward, how we address that throughput, and our ability to accommodate that throughput is going to be something we have to deal with, but we're actively engaged in this issue.
Sir, I just wanted to add one thing about the total Army school system is really tailored to our reserve officers and non-commissioned officers, and giving them the opportunity to get professional military education and JPME1 for our majors. We have a brigade with 6 battalions distributed around the country, and it's somewhat blended, where you spend a couple weeks in residence, places like Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and then you meet in seminar or staff group type formats instead of your drill periods over the course of a year, and then you come back together for another couple of weeks. And we have very good faculty out there doing that for our reserve officers. So they get a good JPME educational experience through the total Army school system, even though they don't necessarily come to Fort Leavenworth or one of our satellite campuses.
I think, as you all know, this subcommittee and the full committee have taken an interest in foreign language skills in our military, and in fact, Mr. Cruz has got to have a draft and an update report I need to sign off here in the next day or two from the report we did a year and a half ago. Just like any general comments you have about where you see foreign language training fitting into this, and then specifically, you know, one of the concerns all along about this is how do you find, you know, get that 25th hour in a 24-hour day for further foreign language training. The QDR Independent Review Panel suggested one way to get at that is for your ROTC students is just to increase the requirement for what they bring in for increased foreign language proficiency. And I'd like any of your comments about foreign language in general, but also that specific comment. Do you want to start again with you, General Naylor?
This is a very difficult issue, Mr. Chairman. At one point in Command and Staff College, they tried to implement as part of the curriculum a foreign language program, and I think that the consensus was that the effort just didn't result in a positive benefit. The Command and Staff still does a key leader engagement exercise where they have to use an interpreter, but there's not a specific language requirement. Recently, the Marine Corps has required commanders, because of key leader engagement mission essential task in theater, that they have to do 40 hours of language before they deploy. And the Marine Corps, and again, this is out of my area, but at the basic school, lieutenants still are being assigned a general area where they're supposed to develop a language, but again, it's on their own time. There's not an enforcement function. An enforcement function on that. I would support again, you know, you're putting more rocks in the ruck of an ROTC student, but I think many people, when you depend upon where you went to undergrad, there was a requirement for a language where I went to school, and somehow we managed to survive that, and that would bring at least a basic fundamental knowledge of language to the force. there will have to be some forcing function I think, to get some traction on this, but it's going to be difficult. The Marine Corps also has a program called AFPAC Hands. Actually, it's been taken from when General McChrystal was ISAF, and he had a cadre of people, and all the services are participating in the AFPAC Hands program. In fact, we have 3 of those officers coming to work for the university as they prepare to deploy, and part of their preparation will be language. So there is a great interest in it, but my personal opinion is we're struggling to some degree to find the time to meet all the other additional requirements in addition to the language. And it's a work in progress, and there's still much left to do.
You know, there was Lori and Dr. Finner, I can't remember, it's a newspaper report, I think just within the last month, that was discussing foreign language skills. And, you know, I remember I had 2 years it took me 2 years of French to get out of high school and 2 years of French to get out of college. And you know, that's what you're talking about. You think, okay, what does that have to do with Iraq? Well, the article pointed out, I can't remember who was quoted, it said, well, maybe you don't have Arabic skills going into Iraq, but the experience of some of our soldiers was the ability to talk to the Allied soldiers was as important. And so the French or Italian or whatever language it was helpful, but ramping up that proficiency level more than just a 2-year jump to get out may be helpful. Mr. Sitterly, did you have?
Yes, Dr. Snyder. This is the language, regional expertise, and culture issue is one that Secretary Donnelly has asked us to look at very seriously, and we have. In addition to an extremely robust ROTC program, a very robust Air Force Academy language program, we also have just held our second language-enabled airman program, LEAP program we call it, where we identify for the very first board, identify cadets coming out of ROTC in the Air Force Academy, and in subsequent boards we intend to look at the total force, but we identify those folks that have a language either capacity or they already have a proficiency that exists, and then we'll take those folks and identify them across their career as LEAP airmen, language-enabled airmen, so that we can send them to some sort of intermediate, training courses in order to maintain that proficiency level. So in other words, if you bring somebody in, they have no aptitude, no proficiency, to send them out to Monterey, the Defense Language School, to get them up to a proficiency where we could utilize them is a large investment. If they have the capability or show the capacity or the proficiency early, then we can send them to perhaps an overseas assignment or just an immersion program where they can get that proficiency level up to 2.2. And our studies show that if you can get the proficiency level on the DLAB score to 2.2, it's a lot easier to maintain that. So we're pretty excited, and so we'll, in our personnel system, then have these folks identified. And so if we, for instance, have the ability to send a C-130 unit or an airman to Germany or Japan, if we can match their ability to speak German or Japanese to build sort of a partnership capacity, then we could make that decision, all things being equal. So we've put a lot into this program.
It's a critical issue for us, Mr. Chairman, and it comes with a number of initiatives that we've taken already, and a delicate balance in the end. First off, we've got a strong linguist program for our cryptologists that gets to the level of 2.2 that is excellent. We leverage off that, along with some of the postgraduate school education, the master's programs for our foreign area officers that focus on language and regional expertise in those master's programs. We leverage those two activities to provide targeted, just-in-time training and education for deploying strike groups and units going overseas, to get them focused on the culture and the region, and to a very minimal degree, some of the language idiosyncrasies. That said, in general, we've increased what we're doing at ROTC with some additional scholarships. We're focused, I think the class of 2010 out of the Naval Academy had 2 language majors graduate, and 10 or 11 with minors in language areas graduate. So our session mission is also focused on that language education. Lastly, I would focus on the increased throughput that both the foreign area officers and just officers in general through postgraduate school and through our curricula at War College. Each class, which is focused on regional areas, has been some of the actions we've taken to date. The balance that I want to talk about has to do with the balance between language education and what we believe is inherent to our force in science, technology, engineering, and math. So we've recently tried to increase our percentages of graduates to 65% out of ROTC and the Naval Academy in science, technology, engineering, and math. So that's where the balance is going to come, how we balance language against those hard educational curricula.
And sir, I just wanted to add, one of my additional hats is the Defense Language Institute works for me, and so I just wanted to tell you that DLI is doing some really good work in developing new instructional techniques for language training. The language training detachments that are now global and spread around the world, and the AFPAC hands is part of that, is an important way that we're infusing language training into the field, giving units that are deploying the language skills that they need, so that there's somebody who's language enabled in each platoon, and developing our own language specialists within the force. We have an LTD, a language training detachment at Fort Leavenworth, and we offer electives in language to our officers, and every officer is required to study, conduct a regional, have a regional elective. So if you have a language skill, that language elective is also available so that you can do a culture and language study, which is very valuable if you're about to deploy somewhere. So the Army is right now in the process of developing what we call the Army Cultural and Foreign Language Strategy. And we've, in fact, DLI teaches culture-based language. And you have to link culture with language instruction, and we think that this is really the model for the future. How we're going to inject that into our PME for enlisted, warrant officer, civilian, and officer is still being studied, though. But we are looking cradle to grave, pre-commissioning through general officer to ensure that there's a continuum of lifelong learning available for those officers with language skills. Thank you.
I think since the last time the subcommittee had a discussion about foreign language, that I forget which TV network it was, had the embedded reporter, that terrible incident where the contracted interpreter was just flat out wrong in what they were saying, and was exasperating for our military officers who thought they were being given false information by the local villagers, and it turned out, in fact, that they were being somebody was putting themselves at risk by giving accurate information, but the interpreter didn't pick that up. It just seems like that. I mean, it seemed to me that was a piece of film that ought to be a part of a training exercise for a long, long time.
It is,
It illustrates, yeah, it is. And then I think it was last week, couple weeks before Thanksgiving, Susan Davis was a host of a breakfast, General Neller, for some of the women Marines that, what do you call those teams that go out?
Female engagement team?
Yeah, they were wonderful women. It was great, one of the speakers. But one of the young women brought up her frustration with interpreters, the varied skill levels of the interpreters they have. And the unfortunate part for me was, I can remember, I think it was with Jim Saxton, before the events of 2001, was holding classified hearings in this room, talking about how we're going to get the language skills we need to keep track of what's going on with all the areas around the world. And I'm thinking, well, it's been a decade now, and we're still having young Marine officers tell us we've got a real problem with having the right language skills. It just seems like it's hampering their activity, but I appreciate the work that you all are doing on it. I think those are about the things that I wanted to get at. Maybe a few closing comments. General Nell, you mentioned enlisted PME, and we did hold the one hearing on enlisted PME. I have to acknowledge it, since Gunnery Sergeant Hector Soto Rodriguez is sitting right behind you and has been my Marine Fellow for this last year, but I appreciate your mention of it. It is something we focus so much on the in-residence officer PME, but the enlisted PME is so So very, very important. And they have some frustrations too, as you know. A couple of you acknowledged the president, Dr. Lori Fenner, who will not be with the committee after this year, and the great work that she has done, as has the staff. I also want to recognize Julie Zelnick on my staff, who, you wonder about, okay, why do these folks get interested? Ike Skelton made a speech a couple weeks ago about his fear that we maybe have a separation from the civilian world and the military world. And why does a young woman like Julie get involved in this? Well, she's got a brother in the military. His wife is in the military. They actually let them serve together in Iraq because they were a lawyer. Are they both lawyers, Julie? Well, one lawyer in the family, but they let them serve together in Iraq as a married couple, which is quite unusual. But when you have it that close, then these things become important to you. I also have to mention Julie, because since I'm leaving, she still needs a job. But I appreciate all the work you have done on this. Mr. Skelton will no longer be here, and I'll no longer be here. I chose not to run for re-election because I got so many babies at home that need their education. But this topic is one I know Mr. Whitman is very interested in it. I'm asking unanimous consent, since I'm the only person here. I'll give it that his statement be included as part of the record. But this topic is one that's very important to you. It's very important to the military. It's very important to the Congress. It's not going to go away, and I appreciate all the work that you have done, and it's been an honor to chair the committee. We're adjourned.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Nice to meet you, sir.